Whoever controls the media controls the mind. Jim Morrison, American singer, songwriter, and poet. All right. Good morning and welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right. We're back on schedule mostly here. Yesterday, things got a little bit out of order, but we managed to work through it. And today we're back at the morning show. And so, what do I got to talk about today? Well, before we do that, make sure that you do all the cool things like subscribe, hit the like button, ring the bell. That way, you don't miss any episodes of the Liberty Dad podcast because I know that you don't want to miss them, right? Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's see what do we've got today. Well, there was a media clip that was going around, and it was 19 seconds. And here's the thing about media clips. A lot of times when you go back and you look at it in context, like the fuller clip, and it doesn't even have to be, it's not like you got to watch an hour-long show. But sometimes when you see something that is 10 seconds and then you go look at maybe a, a longer segment of that clip, like 30 seconds, you're like, oh, well, that was clipped to make it look bad. But in this case, the longer clip is actually worse, much worse. So I painstakingly listened to to the full segment. It's like 8 minutes, and then I chopped it up and in a way that I think will make sense for discussing and talking about it. Now you can all as usual, all links are in the show notes. So if you want to go see everything in the fullest context in order to see if I, cut it up to make it sound one way, go right ahead. I encourage it because, I could get it wrong, but ultimately what I want to do is I want to paint a picture. And so I have moved the clips around just a wee bit, barely out of order. But first, let's see what that clip was. Let's just see exactly what we're talking about so we get a sense of, well, what motivated DL to talk about this and to watch Rachel Maddow and Hillary Clinton for 9 minutes multiple times while he worked on this segment. So here we are.
And boosting Trump back in 2016. But I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda. And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence because.
Okay. So that was the clip. That's it. And there, you might have found I think there were a couple of different versions of that clip, but they were basically about that long. Okay. And so then everybody's like, oh, they want to criminalize people for misinformation. And then you're like, really though? Is that really what they were trying to do? And actually the answer is yeah, kind of. And there are a whole bunch of clips that I could have grabbed. There was a clip of the running mate for Tim Walz, the running mate for Kamala Harris. And he was basically saying like the First Amendment doesn't protect against misinformation. Well, that's not, and hate speech. I think he said hate speech and misinformation. Well, sir, that's actually incorrect. The First Amendment does. In fact, let's just get it out of the way. The First Amendment guarantees the right of Americans to say what they want. And it was specifically about government, right? Like if I said my neighbor's a bum, he barely does any work, doesn't keep up his yard, and I just make all these claims about him, and then I come out on my podcast and I talk about it, right? Like that, like it's protected under the First Amendment, but that wasn't the primary purpose of the First Amendment. The primary purpose of the First Amendment was to be able to say what I want about my government without getting in trouble. That's its purpose. Like, that was its primary purpose. Now, there were other added benefits, right? Freedom of religion and stuff. But and when we're talking about speech, that was the primary purpose of the first, because all the Bill of Rights is all about, here are the limitations of government for the citizens, right? Like, that's what it's for. And the government has a vested interest in not being talked bad about. So naturally, they're going to have an interest, if government is a single entity, there's going to be this vested interest in silencing people, the way it works. Okay. So this clip sounds pretty bad, but it's actually even worse. And, and so if you will bear with me, we're going to watch much of that segment that this came from. Okay. This is from the Rachel Maddow show. So I apologize in advance if you're like, dude, you're gonna make me listen to like 8 or 9 minutes of Hillary and Rachel Maddow talking. Well, I'm not really gonna make you do anything, but I hope you'll stay with me, okay? Because I think we're gonna be enlightened here a little bit. So let's talk about. I'm sorry. Let's watch the first segment. So what I did was I cut it up into 4 segments, and they're a little bit out of order. And the order goes, it's basically, I took the first segment. So once I chopped them up, and I took the second segment and I moved it to the very end, because we're gonna hear about, and it'll make sense why I did this. So let's start with this clip, and this is the very beginning of that interview with Hillary Clinton. Maybe it is. How about we restart? Where's my video? Okay, that's give me a second. We'll figure this out. It was working just a moment ago. I swear I did all my show prep. So let's see here. Where are you go? Why are you not? That's so weird. Okay, so let us try this. Let's see what we got here. I don't know why
I am
it's
struck
there.
by the fact that as his campaign careens into very, very offensive territory, the association with Holocaust deniers and the outrages at Arlington National Cemetery, of all places, the insults to recipients of the Medal of Honor, the recent incredibly racist and dangerous lies about specific groups of immigrants, Haitians in this case, and Venezuelans in the case of Colorado. I am struck by the fact that as much as we thought we might have been inoculated against sort of outrage tactics like that, where everything else gets thrown by the wayside and everybody starts responding to his outrage du jour, it's a way of sort of yanking everybody's chain. I sort of feel like we haven't learned, and he's still being taught, especially by the media, that the more offensive he is, the more he can dominate the media space entirely. And I feel like you've been a good diagnoser of that, not only from when you were up against him, but from what others have done. So do you have an antidote for that, or a way that people can talk themselves out of taking that bait?
Okay. What we're going to do, we're going to hold off on former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's response. Okay. And I want to address one thing. I'm not going to go through and pick apart every single one of her claims there, but I do want to point out one thing that was kind of significant. Because she's like, hey, here's all these terrible things. And she kind of lists them, right? She's like, what he said about the Haitians and what he said about the Venezuelans and, what he said here, what he said here. So she's like, this is all dangerous and, very scary and we got to do something about it, blah, 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 and you're a good diagnoser. I don't know where that comes from. I'm not even going to try to address that one. But I want to point out that with the Venezuelans, remember the Venezuelan story? This was in Colorado and it went around the social media and they were like, hey, look, there's this video from a Ring camera of Venezuelans like walking up and taking over this apartment and kicking people out. And the gang is taken over the apartment complex. And everybody's like, what? And then people are like, that's not happening, blah, blah. And so there's all this argument. Well, enter in the USA Today. Okay. And here's what they reported a little bit later. And isn't that interesting? Right. And I'm going to read it for folks that may not be looking at the screen. Headline: Colorado mayor, police respond to Trump's claim that Venezuelan gang is, quote, taking over. Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman and the city's police have announced arrest and addressed Donald Trump's claims that a Venezuelan gang is, quote, taking over. This is from the USA Today. This came out on September 12th, 6 days ago, 2024. Okay, so sounds like there was something to this story, but there's more from the USA Today. Here's a video clip, and there's just, it's one of those video clips where it's just music and then text. So what I'm going to do is I will play this video, and I'm going to move myself a little bit here. So let me make sure that I'm a little bit out of the way. Let's see if I can't. Let's see here. There we go. Let's do this. Let's move me a little bit over here. You'll see it in just a second so that we can see the text. Hopefully I'm not in the way of the text, but I will also read the text as this clip plays. It's about 45 seconds or so. So let's hear, and this came from the same news article. So like they had the news article, then they had this video clip, which I think was very telling, and we can learn a lot from this 45 seconds. So here we go. Maybe. All right. So it says armed men storm complex in Colorado. Alleged members of the I'm going to pause this for a second, Tren de Aragua, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Venezuelan gang were captured on security cameras. So this is the video footage that stirred up all the controversy, right? And you can see there's dudes in here with like fire, like I'm not say fire, with rifles, with like, they want to talk about like, I don't know what kind of firearm it is, but they want to talk about weapons of war. Like for the average citizen, this probably looks kind of like it, right? You have these dudes, some of them are masked, some of them are not. They got hoodies on. They're coming up to an apartment complex carrying a rifle like they're just carrying groceries. Okay. All right. No more text at the moment. They're entering in. All right. There was a shootout shortly after that sounded like warfare, residents said. Now, the residents said this sounded like warfare. Not, I mean, citizens, look, I get it. Citizens make, exaggerations all the time. I see things pop up on my ring and people are like, what was that? Was that gunshots? And somebody else comes along and they're like, no, that was just fireworks, folks. Just calm down. Right. So I get it. But again, residents, like they may not be able to recognize the distinction between warfare and firecrackers, but they can tell that something is happening that's out of the ordinary. Okay. So we have video footage of these people going into a house armed, heavily armed. And then we have residents saying, hey, afterwards, it sounded like there was a war going on. It was a shootout. Okay. That's not normal. All right. Some residents are moving over growing fears of Venezuelan gang activity. So I want you to think about what this means to move. You have to pack up all your stuff. You have to get a realtor. You have to say, I want to put my house on the market. You've got to figure out, like, do you have anything that needs to be taken care of in your house? Then you've got to stage the house. Then, which basically means keep it super duper clean, make the kids put the toys away every single time they get one out, all that good stuff. Right. Then you have a realtor that says, hey, we're coming by at 5 o'clock. You need to get out. So then they have to leave and go at 5 o'clock and make sure the house is, all nice and ready. Then somebody has to tour through the house. Then there's a huge process, right? Like moving is not, you don't just walk out your door, like you're going to the mailbox. Like this is a significant problem. So if you're moving because of gang activity, then the likelihood is that there is something happening, because people aren't just moving because they're purely afraid and on, information that they think is happening. They know something is happening. Now, whether it's exaggerated or not is another story, but they know something is happening. People don't just move because they heard a rumor. Okay. All right, let's continue. The Aurora Police Department created a special task force to arrest the TDA gang and other crimes, and other crimes affecting migrant communities. To address the TDA gang and other crimes. I said that I'm misspeaking here. So let me start over on that one. The Aurora Police Department created a special task force to address the TDA gang and other crimes affecting migrant communities. So they created a special task force to deal with this. Okay. Now remember, a moment ago, Rachel Maddow was like, man, all these things that Donald Trump and his campaign are saying negatively about migrants, Haitians, and the Venezuelans. Okay. Well, when they were talking about Venezuelans, they were specifically talking about this particular story. All right, so let's continue. The district attorney's office will issue an emergency court order to clear the properties where gang violence occurs. That an emergency court order to clear properties. Does this happen when nothing is going on? No, it doesn't. These are real actions that are being taken in Aurora. Real actions. These aren't people just coming out and saying something. They're doing so. They're expending resources. They're creating whole units to deal with this particular issue. However big or small the problem is, it's big enough to require this level of action. All right. Oh, did I miss that one? All right. So that's what we've got with Aurora. So at least one of those items that Rachel Maddow pointed out was incorrect. Now, is it true that maybe the Trump campaign exaggerated? Sure. Like everybody's exaggerating. Like pick a candidate. I can find somewhere where they have exaggerated a problem. That's naturally what, especially, I mean, maybe not the third parties so much, and maybe, I don't know, but definitely with the big two, because they're going back and forth and they just pick up on anything and they run with it like wild. And in some cases, it's arguable. With the Haitian issue, there may be real issues with the Haitian issue, but the ones that have been viral, from my perspective, have been grossly exaggerated and in some cases just flat out made up, right? And the evidence that people are presenting is very weak and poor evidence. And so it's not, to me, it's not convincing. But this, with the Venezuelan gang, when that first came out, I mean, when it first hit the media, not the media, but social media and whatnot, when it first hit, we saw the video of armed dudes coming up and going in a house. I was like, okay, well, I've lived in apartment complexes before, and I have never seen somebody walking up with what appears to be like an AK-47 or something, just strolling up 4 or 5 people deep into a house. Like, that would be out of the ordinary. That would, if I was a resident, that would freak me out. I would be like, what in the hell is going on? So that is a serious issue. And we had video footage of it. Unlike the Haitian eating cats and all that, we literally had footage on the ground of this same apartment complex, of specific places, of specific people, right? Like we literally had those right away. I was like that's what started it all. And then we turned out there was nothing out of the ordinary with what I'm gonna say. There was nothing incorrect about that video. That video was absolutely correct. And even the USA Today played it while they were talking about all the different things that have been happening in response in Aurora. Now, I want to show you one more thing real quick related to the Aurora. So this comes from the Aurora Police Department's Facebook page. So here you can see that they've addressed it 6 days ago. I'm going to read you just the very first paragraph. The Aurora Police Department has been actively investigating reports that members of a Venezuelan prison gang, Tren de Aragua, have been living in Aurora and committing acts of violence against members of the migrant community. Below is a summary of documented members of TDA known to Aurora Police and reflects APD's actions and authority alone. So they go through and they've listed all the names and what they're arrested for. I'm not going to read all that. It's a lot. But here they are. Documented TDA members known to Aurora Police Department. And they got pictures of 9 out of 10 people that they arrested. Okay. So, and I want you to look back at that. It said, members of that have been living in Aurora and committing acts of violence. And then it says, documented members known to Aurora Police, known to them. So, like the Aurora Police know that there are some gang members doing some bad things in the community, and they arrested 10 of them, and they have charges that they're filing against them. Like they didn't just arrest a bunch of people and say, well, we'll see what happens, but we're arresting you on the basis of Trump's claims. They're arresting them on the basis of crimes that they have alleged to have been committing, and they were known to them, and they are known prison gang members. Okay. So that one completely blown out of the water, completely false on Rachel Maddow's part. But we're not done yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip Clinton's answer to that question. Okay. Being the diagnoser and all that. And we will come back to that in just a moment. I want to skip now to the next segment, which is, so basically you have Rachel Maddow talking. She mentions all this stuff. She asks Hillary Clinton a question. Hillary Clinton responds. And then Rachel Maddow has a second clip where she starts talking. And then, so that's where we're picking back up. So we're jumping around just a wee bit because I want to come back to that. And there's a good reason for that. So here we go. Here is this next clip.
Speaking of
that's weird. I'm gonna fix that on the screen there.
The Department and the State Department have taken a number of actions in the past several weeks, striking actions to both call out and indict and take action against the Kremlin for their attempts at interfering in this in yet another presidential election cycle on Trump's behalf. The State Department has put out a $10 million reward for information leading to for information about people who are about entities that are trying to illegally interfere.
Okay, so she's pointing out there's a reward, a $10 million reward, and if you don't know what they're starting to talk about here, they're starting to talk about. Remember the news of Lauren Chen and her husband who created Tenet Media, and then the Department of Justice started investigating them and said, alleged that. So what the Department of Justice did was they indicted two Russians, not Lauren Chen and her husband, but two Russians. And in the indictment, they obscure all the names of Americans by referring to them as like owner one, owner two. I can't remember. They named some other people who the internet has determined was Tim Pool and some others. And so basically what the indictment says is there's these two Russians who were paying Tenet Media, which is owned by Lauren Chen and her husband, lots and lots of money. And then Lauren Chen and her husband were paying different influencers, Tim Pool and others, to create media for Tenet Media. Okay. And so that's what they're going to be talking about here. So I just want to kind of lay the groundwork for what's going on. So let's continue.
In our election, we've seen these dramatic indictments from the Justice Department, including for paying millions of dollars, the Kremlin paying millions of dollars to pro-Trump influencers. We've seen the Justice Department seize web domains where the Kremlin had set up news sites, what looked like news sites, looked like versions of American news sites, but were secretly operated by the Russian intelligence services or by the Russian government. You feel like the U.S. government is sort of starting to figure out how to do this and taking this seriously enough, or do you still think there's a far distance to go?
Okay. So that's a very interesting question because she's not just saying, hey, what's your take? She's kind of leading. She's like, do you think they've done enough, or is there more? There's more that needs to be done? And let me put up a comment that I thought was great. Here it goes. This is Time Surfing Alien. Never let an opportunity to spend more taxpayer money go to waste. Absolutely correct. This is like, she already talked about there's like a $10 million reward, for Russians. Cause right now we're like in Red Scare 3 or 2 or whichever number we're on right now. Right. It's like the new Red Scare now. We're worried about Russians. We were worried about them last time, and it's the same thing. What are they doing in our media? Are they influencing people? Are they paying people money to produce content, to whatever the case. And I've heard various stories, they want Trump to win. They don't want Trump to win. They just want to sow discord, well, for starters, we can say like, hey, they're influencing, but we should probably have an idea before we go too far, what they're influencing for, because if you're going to charge people, you're going to arrest them, which we'll get to in a minute. You should probably have more facts than what they have. But anyway, let's continue.
I think there's a far distance to go. I applaud the actions taken by the Justice Department and the State Department. I think that they're very important. But truly, we are just at the beginning of uncovering everything that Russia, but not just Russia, other countries have done and are doing to influence our election. If you focus on Russia, and I commend you, Rachel, for your new movie, because we are only at the beginning of understanding the whole iceberg here. What the Russians started doing in 2015 and 2016, what they continued doing, they've gotten more sophisticated. They aren't even pretending anymore. Their international news operation, Russia Today, RT, is an arm of the Russian government, an arm of its intelligence operation. It's basically an extension of their spying efforts.
Okay, so here's what they're doing. So they briefly mention, they don't mention by name, but they briefly mention the indictment that happened, which I told you about. Then they go on and they're talking about all this interference that Russia is doing. And so they're like, well, we've got, they're getting more clever. They're getting more sophisticated. Look, they've been paying some of our own influencers here. Now, remember, at the very beginning, Rachel Maddow was complaining about the media. And she's like, look, the media, they're not really handling Trump so well. They're letting him get away with all this stuff. And in the middle of that, because she's the media, in the middle of that, she doesn't even get at least one major element of her criticism correct. She lumps the Venezuelan story in with the Haitian story, which I think are entirely different stories. And one was very clear, as we saw, there is evidence to support that there was an issue with Venezuelan gang members, not Venezuelans, right? Because remember, USA Today reported and said, this is happening to migrant communities. So what you have this Venezuelan gang that appears to be dominating over other migrants, presumably other Venezuelans. I can't be sure, but that's my assumption. And the reason that they're probably going after migrants is because it's easier, right? If you go after Americans, you're going to have an uproar very, very quickly. Okay. Because the Americans are going to be like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm born and raised in this city, and you're going to kick me out of my home. Are you crazy? Whereas in a migrant and maybe an illegal immigrant, they could be in their house. And if they get kicked out, who are they going to go to? They can't go to the government because, well, right now, everybody seems to hate migrants, right? So yeah, these things fester, okay? But that's a conversation for another day. The point here being that Rachel Maddow is complaining about the news media. Now, I want to point out something here. This is what Rachel Maddow said on behalf of MSNBC. And I wish I did not grab the timestamp, but it was like a year or two ago. Okay. So here is what she had to say regarding that.
I need to say that former President Trump has just started making public remarks, just as he did on the evening of his first arraignment on criminal charges. That was April, when he was booked on 34 felony counts brought by the state of New York. Now, tonight, after his arraignment on federal felony charges, he's speaking again, this time to an audience of his supporters that's gathered for a campaign fundraiser tonight at his golf club and summer home in New Jersey. We knew heading into this that he was planning to make these remarks. We are prepared for his pre-fundraiser remarks tonight to again be essentially a Trump campaign speech. Because of that, we do not intend to carry these remarks live. As we have said before in these circumstances, there is a cost to us as a news organization to knowingly broadcast untrue things.
That's interesting. There is a cost to broadcast untrue things. And somebody, I don't have it, but somebody did a montage of MSNBC and all these untrue things that they said. And they were like, cost, basically, right? But as we just saw with the Venezuelan story, they got that wrong, right? That was untrue in the way that she presented it. I mean, you might argue and say that she was just talking about Trump and his campaign exaggerating the extent of the problem or not really being familiar. But no, not really. I would argue back and say, no, they absolutely were incorrect about that. They shouldn't have included the Venezuelan story at all when she was making her complaints about Donald Trump. saying things that she felt were untrue. Okay. But she broadcasted it, but there's a cost to it. And she doesn't identify the cost. I think she's just making stuff up. Like, what cost? Media broadcast things all the time that are incorrect. And do they get fined for it? Do they go out of business? No, they don't. They just offer a correction and move on their way, or they don't say anything. So to be honest with you, it's total BS. There is no cost that they're paying. They're just making it up. What this is just, you want to talk about virtue signaling? That's what this is. She's just signaling and saying, hey, look, um, we are the ones that need to be talking about this. We are the ones that need to be telling you the news. And we don't make mistakes. It's other people that are making mistakes. That's basically her gist. Let's
We
continue.
are here to bring you the news. It hurts our ability to do that if we live broadcast what we fully expect in advance to be a litany of lies and false accusations, no matter who says them.
So what's funny about this, and this is why the media is dying. And as they like to say, you don't hate the media enough. If you think you hate journalists, you don't hate them enough. How many times has somebody like me, some podcast bro, said, I'm going to live stream the debate, and then they talk about it? Or I'm going to live stream this or that, right? You know, hey, there's a press conference going on. I'm going to live stream. Or maybe they don't live stream, at the time that it's happening. Maybe they do it later, right? And they go back and they say, all right, here are all the things that, that Trump said that were wrong. Here are all the things that Kamala Harris said that were wrong, whatever the case, right? Like, I didn't live stream the last debate, but I was on Twitter and I was basically tweeting out and saying like, okay, well, this is wrong. That's wrong. And other people did even better job than I did. So the idea that they like, oh my God, there's a cost to us if we broadcast Trump lying and we know he's going to tell a lie. Okay, well, for starters, that's not bringing people the news, Ms. Maddow. That's not bringing people. That's deciding what people get to hear. That's what that is. So no, you're not being a news outlet. You are crafting what people should hear. You could easily, look, I've got a simple setup here. Okay. Like, I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment, and I'm not paying, all kind of people to help, do my research. I don't have research assistants and all this other stuff that I can sit down in a room with and work on stories and say, what do we talk about? What are the angles? Blah, blah, blah. I don't have all of that. I have a laptop, a few pieces of equipment, a camera, and a microphone, and I can spend a couple hours a day preparing, and I can get on a show and I can say, here's all the things that they did wrong. I could prepare for a debate and I could say it. I could interject my commentary on the debate as it's happening live. And I'm just a podcast dude. I'm just a dude with a podcast. And you're telling me that all the power and the money and the resources that MSNBC has, they can't do the same thing? No, they're making a choice here because they're trying to tell people what they want them to hear. And it gets even worse. We're not done yet. Let's finish up this clip. It's about 47 seconds.
And I do not say this with any glee. I hope it is clear that this is not a glib decision. We take our responsibilities seriously. We revisit decisions like this all the time. We make the best call that we can in real time, every time. But tonight, our call is this. We will monitor that speech by the newly indicted former president. We will not carry his remarks live. If he says anything newsworthy, we promise we will turn that right around and bring it back to you.
Oh, if he says anything newsworthy. So she wants to say like, oh, the media needs to be presenting people the news. But then she clearly and unambiguously says, this isn't newsworthy. Interesting. Now, it's fine for me. I'm a podcast guy. I'm not with a major network. I'm just a dude, and I'm coming to you what I think is important. And I'm very upfront about that from the very beginning. This is my opinion. This is what I think about it. This is the research that I did. Here are all my sources. Please go fact check me. Fine. And if I do a bad job, well, then and say, DL, you did a crummy job on this. Here's why. Here's all the information that you missed. Right. And I'm willing to be held accountable for that, but I'm at least upfront with you. I'm telling you this is my opinion. I'm telling you when you tune into my show, I'm not telling you that I'm a journalist. I am not telling you that I'm bringing you all the news that you need to know about. I'm telling you, here is my opinion on things that I think are interesting that I want to talk about. That's what I'm doing. And in some way, I'm able to do what the great MSNBC cannot do. And I say that pejoratively. I don't mean them as really great. Let me get to a comment here because I saw a comment. I thought this was very interesting. Where did it go here? There. So from Bruno, he says, untrue things. What a dystopian thing to say. Didn't they speak in support Smollett and so many other lies? Absolutely. Remember Jesse Smollett? And he was all like, oh, I was attacked by a couple white dudes and they were like MAGA country and they beat me up. And we turned out the entire story was fabricated. Wasn't true one bit. Not one bit. But the media had no problem running with that story before they figured out the facts. They just assumed like, oh, black man saying that he was attacked by white people yelling MAGA country totally sounds true. Why did it totally sound true to them? Because that's what they believe. And so they didn't come to us with the news that they investigated and researched. They came to us with the narrative that they already believed existed. And they said, we believe this happened, so therefore it must have happened, right? Because America's racist. That's what they did. And did they apologize? I don't know. They might have. Maybe they came out and said, hey, we're sorry. We're going to do better. But to be honest with you, even if they did, I would reject that apology. Why? How long has MSNBC been doing this? Like, there is no reason they should be bamboozled so easily. They could say, hey, we've heard reports. This is what happened. We're investigating. We'll get back to you. We're going to find out the truth of this. But we're telling you this is what's been reported as of right now. But nope, they ran with it. They told it, and I put money that if I dug in, I would find that Rachel Maddow totally ran with that story, total without the facts. So yeah, this untrue things, they say them all the time. Please give me a break. All right, let's look at this next clip from Rachel Maddow. So we just heard the third clip, and so this next clip is what follows, and I think I shortened it a little bit just to kind of make it a little easier on you folks because I know that I'm forcing you to listen to two people that you probably would not want to listen to otherwise at 7:30 in the morning. So I appreciate you sticking around with me. So here's that next segment because we're not done.
I think that's really a critical question. And I think there's a couple of things going on here. You mentioned the press, and sadly, the press is still not able to cover Trump the way that they should. They careen from one outrage to the next. What was outrageous 3 days ago is no longer on the front pages, even though it threatens the physical safety of so many people, particularly, as you point out, immigrants that he and Vance have decided to demonize. And I don't understand why it's so difficult for the press to have a consistent narrative about how dangerous Trump is. The late, great journalist, Harry Evans, one time said that, journalists should, really try to achieve objectivity. And by that, he said, I mean, they should cover the object. Well, the object in this case is Donald Trump. His demagoguery, his danger to our country and the world, and stick with it.
Okay, so this is now. I want you to keep in mind, this isn't some talking head, right? Rachel Maddow is, but Hillary Clinton has been in public office. Her last role was the Secretary of State. Right. She's also been the first lady, and I think she was in the Senate as well. She has held plenty of positions in the government. So while she is not in the government currently, she is effectively you can call her a representative of the government because that is the primary role that she has adopted over many years. She has been in government. Now she's not speaking on behalf of government, but kind of. Okay. And so she is now, as somebody who comes from a government background, encouraging media to shape the narrative. And remember, we were just talking about the Russians. Okay. So now that we've heard all that, let's go back. Remember the first clip that we played. Rachel Maddow was like, hey, here's all these stories. What do you think? Are we, and she kind of gives her that leading question. So let's hear what Hillary Clinton has to say regarding that particular let's hear that response. So, and did I did I play it out of order? No, I don't. No, I think I played it. Did I get that all right? Oh, you know what? Did I play this one? I might have misplayed one. I might have made a mistake here. Let's see.
They are using Americans, both
Oh,
those who are
did I play this
witting
one?
and willing, and those who are unwitting and are just so surprised. They're getting, $400,000 a week,
Oh,
or
yes.
100,000.
I don't think I played this. I think I played them a little bit out of order, the order that I intended to. So that last clip was the last clip that I meant to play. So hold your thoughts on that one. Let's continue this one, then we'll go back. So I apologize, folks. I made a mistake.
$1,000 a podcast to parrot Kremlin propaganda.
Okay. So this is what I wanted to address first. And I apologize again, but we're going to work through it. No big deal. This is what happens when you're not a big bad boy like MSNBC and you're all by your lonesome self. You make mistakes, but I'm at least forthright with my mistakes. So anyway, so now she's like, hey, we're paying people $400,000, $100,000. So what she's talking about, she's directly referring to the indictment that said, hey, these Russians paid millions of dollars to Tenet Media. Tenet Media in return paid, people like Tim Pool $100,000 an episode for, certain material. And then the argument that I've been hearing and that I believe is that Tim Pool and others, they still retained creative control. So, and in the indictment, it says they didn't know. It claims that they were victims. The indictment does. Okay. So we're not talking like, it's not like Tim Pool's coming out and trying to cover his ass and saying, hey, you know what? I was just a victim. Even the Department of Justice, who has the who forwarded the indictment, they are claiming that he was that he was an innocent person. And then here we're talking about all this Russian interference and how they're paying $100,000, but they're not quite being so forthright about this because Mrs. Clinton here does not point out that the DOJ themselves indicates that the $100,000 was paid to somebody who didn't know. And I know some people are like, whoa, if you get paid $100,000 and you don't know. Well, here's the thing. If you get paid $100,000 from from a major media company that appears to be fully American, and they're like, hey, we want you to produce some content for us. And you are somebody like Tim Pool, $100,000 is probably a normal amount of money, right? So, and it's not, if somebody came to me as a small time podcaster and they said, DL, I want to pay you $100,000 because I love your show, I'd be excited. Okay. So, anybody wants to do that, I'm willing to listen. I'd be excited, but it would be the onus would be more on me to say, well, wait a minute, why are you paying me $100,000? I'm not in the $100,000 league yet, right? Like, I love to be there, but I'm not there. You want to pay me $100,000 for one episode, and I've been doing all these episodes for free, and now I'm going to get paid for it? What's the catch? Something's up. However, if I'm Tim Pool level, well, Tim Pool's multimillionaire from his work. Okay, so the idea that he would get paid $100,000 for an episode is not out of the ordinary. It'd be closer to somebody coming to me and saying, DL, I've been watching your show. I love your show. I want to invest in it, and I would like to pay you $100 an episode. And for that, I just need you to do whatever, probably promote their business, whatever the case may be, right? Put their branding on my show, something like that, right? So that would be more in line. And so if somebody wanted to pay me $100 and they've been watching my show, well, that's not so out of the ordinary. That's about where I am in my level. So do I need to go and dig deep and say, okay, where's that $100 coming from? Who's paying you? No, I don't. I might investigate them a little bit and say, looks like you're clean. I'm going to move forward with this deal. Right. And that's what I believe Tim Pool did. But that's not the distinction that's being made here on the media that is complaining about untrue stories that the media is running with. Okay. They're running like in this same segment, they're running with lies and untruths in this same segment. Like this whole 8-9 minute segment that these two did. So let's continue watching.
And we know from what even Republicans have said, the chairs of the Intelligence Committee and the, Foreign Affairs Committee and other Republicans who are currently in office have said that Republicans go to the floor of the Congress and they parrot Russian talking points.
Oh, that's interesting. So now we're talking about Republicans parroting Russian talking points. Now, they haven't said what these Russian talking points are. Now, I want to point out that Tim Pool and others, they retained full creative control. So these are the things that the content that they produced is likely content that they would have produced otherwise, right? Or it's at least in line with content that they're already producing. So in other words, let's go back to my little story. Imagine somebody comes and says, "DL, I want you to put together some, some more content. I'm going to pay you some additional, some money so that you can produce it. And it's, because I really like your stuff. And so now I'm producing more content that's similar to the content that I already created. It's not out of the ordinary. It's not like I'm creating all new content that is totally deviates from my perspective. It's this basically the same kind of content in a sense, right? It's very similar in a sense. So if that happens, then the question is it really a Russian talking point, or are Russians just paying me because of things that I'm already saying? Back to what Mrs. Clinton was just pointing out. She said, hey, Republicans are speaking Russian talking points. What are those talking points? Are they points that these Republicans would have otherwise said anyway, and now we just get to slap the label Russian talking point on them? Or are these things that the Russians have directed them to say? That is a big difference, but they don't seem to mention any of that. All right.
So I think it's important to indict the Russians, just as Mueller indicted a lot of Russians who were engaged in direct election interference and boosting Trump back in 2016.
Okay. So if you want to indict or bring charges against foreign nationals for doing things that they shouldn't be doing by interfering in the election, not registering with FARA when they were supposed to, those kind of things, I guess fine, right? And I say that reluctantly because I don't really want to dig in and try to decide whether or not I think you should. Personally, I value freedom of speech, and the only thing that I think is necessary is transparency. And some would argue that FARA does make it transparent, because if you're registered with them and then somebody wants to know and say, okay, hey, Tenet Media is being paid. How are they being paid? And then we find out that there's documented evidence that they're being paid by Russian nationals. Then some people would argue that is a matter of transparency. So that's fine. But I haven't really dug in deep to determine whether or not I really support FARA or not. But I do support transparency. So it's possible that I would support FARA or other avenues which make sure that, hey, if somebody's paying me money, you know what that source is, right? And I think that's fair. I am all about transparency. So I have no issue there. But let's continue.
But I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda. And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence, because the Russians are unlikely, except in a very few cases, to ever stand trial.
Okay. So basically, she's like, we should go after the Russians or other foreign actors who are acting in a, in a way that we can bring charges, but they're likely not going to stand trial anyway. Why? Because they could just be living in Russia. And what's Russia going to do? Like, oh, some of our people were paying your people to say some more stuff that you don't like. Yeah, we'll hand them over to you. Of course, that's not going to happen. So now she's suggesting that they should go after people. But the problem is they're not making a determination, or they're not distinguishing between what is a Russian talking point that Americans might not otherwise be saying versus what is a quote unquote Russian talking point that Americans already are saying. So if I'm coming out and I'm being very critical of Kamala Harris, let's just say I'm a diehard Trump supporter and I'm very critical of Kamala Harris. And then the Russians come over and say, man, we like what you're doing. Can we give you some money? And I say, well, yeah, sure. Right now, I'm all about some transparency there. And that's fine to be transparent so that people know what's going on. But the real question here is that actually a Russian talking point? Or are they just saying, you know what? We like what you're saying. Let's help amplify that. Now, here's the question. Would that need to be amplified if places like MSNBC were not choosing what news they were willing that we were allowed to listen to? Because that's basically what they said. They said, we are going to, she said it, whether you heard it in her own words. If Donald Trump at his press release says something newsworthy, we will tell you. And so then they want to turn around and go, well, we're not covering this, but these people are, and they might need to be criminally charged. Doesn't that sound a little like Big Brother to you? Criminally charged? And you have the former Secretary of State, somebody whose entire career was government. They're coming out and saying, yeah, I'm the diagnoser, as Rachel Maddow pointed out. So therefore, my diagnosis is different things need to happen. The media is not quite where it needs to be. And we might need to charge Americans who are saying Russian talking points, for which they never define what a Russian talking point is. If I'm against abortion, let's just take it entirely different context. If I'm against abortion and I just spend all my time talking about, criticizing the idea of abortion and criticizing laws that might favor abortion, right? If that's what I truly believe, and then the Russians come over and they help amplify that in whatever way, right? Let's say they blow me up and they make me big, right? Is it really a Russian talking point? No, it's not. It's my talking point. And the only thing the American people need to know is it mine? And any transparency that's related to it. But otherwise, the government doesn't need to be involved at all. It is not their job. It's not the government's job to decide what sources Americans can hear from, whether that source is MSNBC, a lowly podcaster such as myself, who has no funding from anybody, a major podcaster like Tim Pool, who generates his own revenue and gets money from a stateside company, or if it's tenant media getting paid by the Russians, right? Like the only thing that's necessary is transparency. Beyond that, the government doesn't get to decide where I get my news. If all I want to watch is RT news, that's none of the government's business, and that's none of MSNBC's business. They can talk about it. They have that freedom to talk about it, but otherwise, they have no business trying to support limitations upon me, which is exactly what Rachel Maddow was doing, which is exactly what Hillary Clinton said. And so when I say that 19-second clip was just like the tip of the iceberg, it was. The whole segment was nothing but Big Brother. It was nothing but, you're not getting the news we want you to hear. And we need to figure out how to make that happen. Does that mean we got to criminalize people who are getting funding or sound like they might be Russian, whatever that even means? Right? Like, and they're just going to, I think between yesterday's show that I did and today's show, I think there's plenty of evidence to say we need to be very, very careful because our First Amendment is on the line. Because they're starting to look and saying, all right, well, we're going to go after and criminalize people for saying things that are Russian talking points. Okay. If Russia likes what I say, so what? So what? I have the freedom of speech. You know what? Let's take it even further. Let's say that I'm watching RT News all the time. I don't, by the way. But let's say I did. And I watch it and I'm like, yeah, and they're influencing me. And then I come on my podcast and I start saying the things that I heard. Okay. How is that any different than if I were to watch CNN and then go and parrot what I heard on CNN, or MSNBC and go parrot what I heard on MSNBC, or if I watch Fox News and I go parrot them, right? Like, it's not any different. It really isn't. And the only thing, again, is what sources. Give me some transparency, and then American people can figure it out. The reason they're Big Brother is because they're acting as if Americans can't make their own decisions. Like, they need to be led, because they're not really a proper media. A proper media would say, look, here's a story. Here are the details. You decide. I don't mean to sound like I'm Fox News, but they would basically be saying that. Like, you figure this out. And then they might have their talking heads who are opinionated. They might say, well, our talking heads lean more left, our talking heads lean more right, whatever. And so they would bring them on, and then the talking heads could give us the opinion versions of that. Right. And that's fine. That's the way it should work. What should not be happening is that a former head of state should not be talking about criminalizing Americans because they sound like Russian talking points, this undefined, unclear terminology. Unacceptable. This is unacceptable. All right, let's take a look at some comments, see what we got in here, and then we'll wrap up the show. Yes, Keith says, I can transmit what I believe is false or intend to deceive. You can. Like, I could get on here every day and do a podcast and just make up lies, right? Now, there might be some consequences depending on the impact of those lies. Like, if I start, going out and, I don't know, videotaping people at Home Depot and getting them fired, then, maybe that person might have a claim against me, that specific individual. But ultimately, I do have the freedom to speak. And the freedom is not limited to what MSNBC thinks I should say, or what Hillary Clinton or Rachel Maddow think I should say, or what you should be able to hear. That's not how this works. So yes, they are subtly, but not so subtly, coming out against freedom of speech. And remember, I don't have the clip. I wish I did. But Tim Walz, I'll add it in the show notes so you can go look at it. But Tim Walz, he directly said that misinformation and misinformation, what was the other one? Misinformation and hate speech. He said misinformation and hate speech were not protected. That's actually not true, right? The First Amendment is not there so that we can all speak nice and speak accurately, truthfully, however defined by somebody else. It's not how that works. I can say that Hillary Clinton has killed a lot of people if I want. That's how this works, right? And it doesn't have to be true. Although I think some of you already know. Anyway, let's see what else. We got any other comments I better address? Let's see here. Let's see. I think that's all the comments that I'm going to bring up. But I thank you for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Please be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for Eastern time for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. Please let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time.